The heavy oak door groaned on its hinges, swinging inward to reveal the dim, stagnant air of the study. Sarah and Mark stood on the threshold, their chests heaving with the rhythm of a 3-day trek that had finally hit a wall. Sarah gripped the doorframe, her knuckles white, while Mark stood a half-step behind her, his weight shifting unevenly as he fought to keep his balance. They had reached the end of the road, yet the distance between them and the man by the fireplace felt wider than the miles they had just crossed. Eli sat motionless in a high-backed chair, his gaze fixed entirely on the dying embers in the hearth. He did not turn. He did not acknowledge the draft that swept in with them. The silence in the room was not empty. It was dense, pressing against their skin like deep water. Sarah took a shaky breath, the sound rasping in the quiet, but the air in the room remained stagnant. Every second that ticked by without a word from Eli tightened the knot in their throats. They had come to settle a debt of years, but standing in the shadow of his stillness, the weight of their arrival felt like a crushing, immovable burden. Sarah moved first. Her boots scraped against the floorboards, a harsh, grating sound that seemed to offend the stillness of the room. She took one step, then another, closing the gap until she stood within arm's reach of the chair. Her hand drifted toward her pocket. She fumbled with the fabric, her fingers clumsy and unresponsive, until she finally hooked a small, worn photograph. She pulled it out, intending to hold it up, to offer some proof of a time before the silence. But her hand betrayed her. It shook with such violent rhythmic intensity that the edges of the paper blurred. She could not hold it steady. With a sharp, jagged breath, she shoved the photograph back into her pocket, her knuckles white. "We are sorry," she whispered. Mark remained anchored to the spot behind her. He bowed his head, his shoulders hunching forward as if he were bracing for a physical blow. Eli did not shift. He did not blink. He remained a statue, his back a rigid, impenetrable wall that absorbed their apologies. The silence held for 3 long heartbeats before the chair groaned. Eli stood. He did not turn to face them, but his posture shifted, the tension in his shoulders releasing into a slow, deliberate fluidity. He walked past the fireplace, his boots making no sound on the wood, and stopped at the window. He looked out at the forest, where the light was failing, turning the trees into jagged silhouettes against the gray sky. He traced the edge of the window frame with his index finger, his movement rhythmic and precise. "I needed parents," he said. His voice was steady, lacking any tremor or heat. It cut through the room with the precision of a blade. Not apologies. He did not look back. "I forgave you a long time ago." The words hung in the stagnant air, cold and final. Mark opened his mouth to respond, but his throat tightened, and no sound emerged. He stared at the back of Eli's head. Eli turned away from the window, his movements devoid of hesitation. He walked toward the wall near the door, his gaze fixed on a point somewhere beyond Sarah and Mark. He reached for the hook, his fingers closing around the fabric hanging there. He slid his arms into the sleeves and adjusted the collar with a sharp, efficient jerk. He moved toward the threshold. Sarah shifted, her breath catching, but Eli did not glance at her. He did not slow his pace. He walked directly past them, his presence passing through the room like a cold draft. He did not acknowledge their existence, not with a nod, not with a look, not with a single word. The floorboards groaned under his weight as he reached the doorframe. He stepped out onto the porch, his back to them. He gripped the latch and pulled. The heavy wood swung inward, then slammed shut with a finality that vibrated through the floor. The click of the lock echoed through the empty room, sharp and metallic, sounding like a gavel striking a block. It was a sound of absolute severance. Sarah and Mark remained standing in the center of the cabin, frozen, the silence rushing back in to fill the space Eli had just vacated. They were merely ghosts in a house. The silence in the cabin was absolute, a heavy weight that pressed against their ears. Then, the quiet was shattered. Outside, an engine turned over, the starter grinding before the motor caught with a low, guttural roar. Sarah and Mark moved in unison, their boots thudding against the floorboards as they rushed to the window. They pressed their palms against the cold glass, their breath fogging the surface. Outside, the car pulled away, its tires crunching over gravel and dead leaves. They watched the red taillights cut a path through the dark, growing smaller and dimmer with every passing second. The glow flickered once against a tree trunk, then vanished entirely into the black expanse of the woods. The engine noise faded until the forest reclaimed its stillness. They were finally alone, left behind in the structure that had once been a home.